Okay, Mr. Chair, FedEx, we are now on live stream.
All right, this is the Pedestrian Select Safety Committee. This is our second public meeting starting Dan Heddick's chair. Thank you everyone for joining, as well as our public members. Thank you so much. Today is going to be very, very focused because we have a very specific task in front of us, which is to get our volunteers ready to go out and collect data. So I know in our last workshop session, we had briefly gone over the kind of documents that we're going to be providing to people to fill out or print out at home. I know we already went over that. Hopefully everyone has that PDF. And really what we're going to do today is we're just going to focus on narrowing down some of the data that we want to collect, what's necessary, and how we can make this easier for the volunteers to do, and then talk a little bit about training. And hopefully we already have, as of right now, about 14 or 15 volunteers who have signed up already, which is great. I haven't checked how many hours, but a bunch of them actually asked for more than a single hour. So we have already a good group of people, and that's before we've put out social media blasts. That's really just from the CB10 newsletter.
Right.
So I'm expecting we'll get quite a few more, which is really encouraging. But yeah, I'm gonna open up to the floor. This isn't gonna be like a voting kind of day. If anyone from the public wants to chime in, we'll try to keep track of that in the Zoom and let people chime in if they have any specific questions or concerns. But we have that document in front of us. Let's continue the conversation from last time. Staley, I know that you had some updates on how you were putting things together, if you want to start off.
Oh, sure. I can talk a little bit about that. Do you mind if I share my screen? Is that possible?
Yeah, go ahead.
Stand by. All right, cool. Everyone can see my slide with the guy drawing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've been working on is trying to refine what we're going to be asking our surveyors to do in the field. I'm sort of learning about this as I go, just like we all are. So I've done a little more reading and a little more refinement of how to approach things, and I kind of started thinking about, how can we optimize, or what can we provide that isn't already available in some of the data that like Dan's been getting together and some of the data that the city already has, right? So the city already has a lot of really, sort of like macro data in terms of like vehicle volumes and speeds and things like that. So I started to think about, well, what can we contribute to that? And there's a couple of things, and I threw together some examples just to kind of illustrate them. One is that although we do look at traffic volumes and there is some city data on pedestrian volumes, what we don't really have is good data on the makeup of pedestrians, like who is on the street, whether it's children or older adults or whatever, where the makeup of those people. And one way that we can measure that is through what they call a screen line survey, which I put an illustration of here. And this is simply standing at a point in the middle of a block and marking down who walks by you and what direction they're going in and who they are. Are they on a bicycle? Are they an older adult, younger adult, and so forth? So this is one thing that's pretty quick and easy to do, and gives us an idea of, first of all, kind of where people are going, how busy areas are, and also who is in that area, right? Like who are the people that are using that area. Mm-hmm. The second thing that I think we add is, what we've talked about in some of the other meetings called a walk audit, right? So walk audit is basically looking at what kind of safety measures are already in place or not in place, right? This is just an illustration of sort of a perfect intersection that has every type of possible pedestrian safety measure in it. And we can look at those and see if, not only if they're there, I mean, if they're there, but also if they're functional, if they're broken, or if they're working, if they're if they're damaged, and that's a pretty easy thing for us to do as well, and something that we can provide. And then the biggest thing that we can provide is here. This is not the safe systems pyramid; it's another pyramid. What this is talking about is what's called pedestrian exposure, and this is the biggest thing that I think. The biggest change that I've come up with since our last meeting, right? So, one of the ways that we figure out which intersections and which roadways need to have safety measures implemented is by looking at crashes, right? The problem is that crashes don't happen often, right? Like an intersection that has one serious accident might be considered, that one accident might make that intersection a high priority, right? So they're very, what am I trying to say? A very gross measure, a very rudimentary measure of how dangerous an intersection is and whether it needs safety measures. So there's this other idea that it was developed through like NHTSA and some other people like that, of pedestrian exposure. And so what they look at is they look at behaviors in the intersection. And this is something that our field surveyors can do fairly easily, right? It's looking at what they call conflict and avoidance maneuvers. So a conflict between a car and a pedestrian, for example, is when a pedestrian enters the crosswalk and the car stops, right? That's not necessarily a dangerous situation of itself, but if that happens a lot in a certain amount of time, that shows that that's an intersection that probably needs closer study, right? Because vehicles and people are often in conflict in that intersection, right? Mm-hmm. And that's increased pedestrian exposure, increased risk. And then they also look at something called avoidance maneuvers. So avoidance maneuvers are just when a car has to do something sort of extreme to avoid hitting somebody, like hitting the brakes all of a sudden or swerving out of the way all of a sudden. And this also contributes to risk, right? And then the last thing is what they just call user opinion or ratings. And this is something that, Jack Zhang has already started developing a little bit, which is a survey where you can just ask people about what they feel about an area. And that's valuable too. Do people feel like they're at risk? Do people feel like an intersection or a section of road is dangerous? So all of those things on that pyramid below crashes, those bottom three things are things that are really not collected by the city, and things that are somewhat subjective and so perfect for our surveyors. This is a real valuable contribution that we can make. And now I have one more slide, which is just to show that measuring for these behaviors is actually fairly easy, right? And not particularly time consuming, right? One can really just position themselves in a spot where they can see the entire intersection. And then those behaviors, those conflicts and avoidance maneuvers are rare enough that they'll pop out, and they're fairly easy to count, right? It's not something that's happening every 3 seconds. And it's easy to count those for an intersection, and then to figure out like how much pedestrian exposure there is. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too much, but that's kind of where I'm going. I'm hoping this week to kind of develop this more into actual tally sheets and survey tools that we can use.
Yeah, I mean, I love the inclusion of avoidance maneuvers because I
Right.
Going through a lot of the research and data on like pedestrian safety, that really does seem to be like how they measure, like how data scientists are measuring risk. Right? They're looking at, oh, person crosses the street. Does car have to slow down at all on approach? Does it brake? Even not even a strong brake, just any brake implies that if those two individuals, car and pedestrian, just continued and ignored each other, would they have collided? And measuring how many times that happens, right?
Correct.
Normally, like, traffic lights would stop that, but if it's an unsignalized intersection, count how many times like a person and a car look like they're about to be on a collision, even if they correct, and they most likely will during our study. I hope no one's actually seeing a crash during our studies, but then you're getting a much more visceral concept of risk, right?
Yeah, and with a little bit of a little bit of practice and warm up, our surveyors, will begin to like easily detect what you're looking for, like brake lights next to a pedestrian, basically, right? You're looking for a car stopping with somebody in the road. And after you've looked at an intersection or two, I think it gets easy to kind of detect that and count it.
How do you guys feel about that? I'm going to take silence as a unanimous, that's actually pretty neat.
No round of applause.
Everyone's on mute, so.
I'll throw out one other thing and then I'll shut up. This is something we can also discuss. So a lot of these studies are actually done by video, which is another option that we could throw out there, right? As opposed to actually tallying in real time, just asking people to videotape and submit. Videotape. I sound like I'm from 1995. To record a video of the intersection and then review it later. That's another way to do it.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot to ask people to do. I think if we're asking people with not a lot of experience in what the issues are and what we're looking at, to ask them to video an intersection while recording the activity at the intersection, I think we're pushing it.
Well, I guess it would have to be an either or then, based on Doris's thought. Like, they wouldn't be filling out the report if they videotaped, right?
Or maybe there could be a box. Do you think this intersection should be videotaped?
Yeah, that would also be if they think that, like, it might be interesting to have a section to say, hey, I think that there's more to be observed here within my
Right.
how long it took. I like that, to have just a section at the bottom for our thing that says like, hey, please follow up on this intersection, maybe?
I mean, I have actually videotaped stop places on Marine Avenue, where there's a crosswalk and a stop sign. And it's really, it is helpful to videotape and then to kind of review the data.
I really like the idea of having people videotape. My only concern is a logistical one, which is the size of the video and getting it to us, right? Like, how do they share that video in a way that is easy for us to process and get, rather than like someone like me downloading, random video files that the public is sending, and making sure that that's safe and that is also like something that we can then distribute later and review. Some of those iPhone videos can sometimes be very large, and if you're thinking about a 15-minute video, I'm worried about like having like 5 gigs on a single video.
Yeah.
Why would somebody have to submit the video? The video is actually helpful in terms of filling out the form.
That's true. I didn't think about it like that. That's really like
That's why I said you can review the video.
And then they fill the form out.
And then they fill in the form.
Yeah, we could that's part of the training that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right?
That's what I meant. And I'm not advocating for doing it by video. I'm just putting it out there as an option. I actually think it's kind of nice to do it in person and just do the tally in person. But there's the idea, like you're saying, Barbara, is that the video is submitted and then another person sits there and watches the video and fills out all the data.
Well, the thing about standing at the intersection, because I did it on several occasions and I did it for like 20 minutes, it's hard to capture because there's so much going on. There's a person stopping in this direction. There's a person stopping in the other direction. They're coming this way and that way. So if it's a 4-way intersection, it's very hard to catch every single thing that's going on. But if you do video the intersection for a period of time and then review the video and fill out the form, it becomes much easier.
Yeah, Chris, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say, for snapshot and pulse surveys like this, you don't want to spread yourself thin. Like, I'm not really clear on the geographic area that you're covering, But if you really want to get an informed survey, I'm assuming that you're going to really start in a very targeted way in one area so that you maximize all the volunteers that you have.
Mhm.
And that way you can very quickly get that information. Like if you're just surveying, the things that make the area safe, that's not so difficult. But if you're looking for those other instances, where there's conflict and things like that, you may want to, and this is where you can bring more volunteers in, you know, once you have that instrument ready on how you're going to do that survey, to say, we're looking for people to be observant in this particular geographic area during this particular time frame. You know what I'm saying? I'm just not clear what the overall timeline is for doing this, you know?
And I should absolutely have put that
Yeah.
out at the very front. So the way that we currently have it structured is that we have already 14 volunteers, it'll be more, but we also have the whole district to kind of not cover. We're not going to obviously hit every intersection, but we already do have like a priority list of intersections, single locations that we feel people in the past or based on data that we got from the crash mapper we found to be problematic and would warrant further study, a pedestrian study, basically. So we would be sending our volunteers for this spring to go to stand basically at a single intersection and gather data and fill out a single sheet or a tally on that one location. And then if they have signed up for more than that on the volunteer form, we can assign them I'm going to give them like a list of locations. I'll give them, depending on how much time they signed up for, here's your like core assignment. And then I'll also add like 2 bonuses just in case they liked it and they did, and they're like, hey, maybe you can do more. Here's a couple of more bonus locations you can get to, but that aren't on our priority list. And that's really how it would work. And then they either scan them, take a photo of it, and send it back to us. Or bring it into the office. And then we process all that data and we put it in on a digital map. So that is going to be kind of, and then there's opportunity because we're doing this kind of early. If we want to send another wave out, volunteers there was a tick box on that volunteer form of, do you want to get contacted again? In case they want to go for more in-depth studies later. Yeah, and Stephanie, please. You had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just had a question. You mentioned training. You do intend to train the volunteers and I saw attached to one of the emails regarding this meeting, you had tally sheets. I'm assuming that that's the template from which you're going to be working. It said like roadway, bike lane. Do you know what I'm talking
about? That was the very early template.
Oh, okay.
Very complex, not the most that we're going to design. And that's really what this meeting is about, is taking that data, compressing it down, getting a couple of data points that we want to gather that would make a very easy to fill out form for the volunteers. That doesn't require too much expertise.
Okay.
It requires some training. And I do think that even a simple form should have some level of training. My original thought, and please jump in if you have better ideas, was to offer possibly a training at the office, if that makes sense, Josephine, with a specific time if anyone wants to come in person, but also to record a video training and put it online and just kind of, 5 minutes. It could be, I know how to work a video camera and edit. We can do like a 5-minute training that then we could, when we send out emails with people's assignments, we could say, here's the training about what all these things mean. And you can watch someone fill one out kind of in real time and show how it could be done and how you get it back to us and all that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that there'd actually be a demonstration of how, for all the times that I have videoed intersections, I still think I would be at a loss as to how you want it captured accurately. So, okay, thank you.
Also, Dan, there was a question in the chat
Yeah.
about signing up for volunteers. So we'll post the volunteer link on the website. It was distributed in a newsletter. There's been some shares. So that link will be readily available on our
Yes, we will put that
website.
up on CB10 social media
Yes,
soon. I
yeah.
will probably tomorrow or the day after do a post on Bay Ridge Talk and some of the larger social media sites with a sign up link so we can start getting that more fully fledged and see what we're working with. Anyone else want to jump in on like data they feel is like the most important thing to capture and especially based on that existing PDF, like things we should nix?
I think since we're talking about pedestrian safety, we should ask people if they observe bicycles of any kind on the sidewalk,
I think that
because that's a serious pedestrian safety issue.
I agree. I would think that with the screening survey, we just want to capture number of cyclists. I think that cyclists on sidewalks, sure, but I would also want to capture cyclists in the roadways. I'd want to capture quantity because a quantity period, because a cyclist can be in a point of conflict with other road users, including motorists, at any point, whether they're on sidewalk or on the road, right? If you're crossing a crosswalk and there's a bike lane, we should know how many cyclists are in that lane and whether it's being used. A lot of them are. That goes back to that question we had before about identification, how hard it is to identify an e-bike versus a bike.
Yes.
That's something that we probably should define today, how we want that notated. Because it will be very difficult for people to make those distinctions, and I don't want there's a question of whether we even need to make that distinction, right? Whether we need to capture that data at all. Do we need to know the difference between an e-bike and a bike? For the purposes of this study.
Right. Could we say motorized versus non-motorized? Just
Yeah, and
simply.
it's hard, and it would be hard to understand because there are like pedal-assisted devices,
Right.
but are they actively using it at the time? Does that count if they are pedaling and not actively using their motor in that one moment? Does that make it a bike and not an e-bike? No idea. That's a kind of a philosophical question at that point, right? But I do want to capture cycling data, period.
Right.
Which I think would be part of that tally, right? We could to bridge that gap of like sidewalk versus roadbed, we could probably have in Staley's original tally sheet, you note you don't like do a tally, you don't like put like a hash mark like most tallies, 1, 2, 3, 4 cross, 1, 2, 3, 4 cross. It's by letter in Staley's original design. I really like it, where you write an A for an adult, O for an older adult, and C for a child, or teenager to child. We'll make that part of the training. There is a section for like cyclist, and you mark down when you see a cyclist, A, O, or C. Child on a bike, older person on a bike, adult on a bike. Maybe we could have it where you circle that bicyclist if they're on the sidewalk and not if they are in the roadbed. So you're capturing the data, but you're also capturing cyclist data in general on a screening survey. That might be a way of doing it, but if anyone has a better idea.
Do you think that should be distinguished, a cyclist versus a scooter or a motorcycle or?
I'm not sure if we really need to
that
distinguish
granular.
those, because I feel like unless someone has a strong indication that there's like a very severe difference in like outcome in a collision, like I'm not sure if like I'm not sure how an e-bike is going to do as much or more damage than a regular cyclist in terms of like injury, but maybe they do. I don't know. So Constantine, please.
Yeah, I just think it's important that we don't conflate, scooters or mopeds, whatever. I think moped is probably the wrong word because it implies that it has pedals and they don't have pedals. I think scooters or like a Vespa style motorcycle is what it is. It goes over 30 miles an hour. Those shouldn't be conflated with e-bikes, even if they are electric. They're just in a different class altogether. And if you were hit by one of those, the outcome would probably not be that great. And then someone might say, oh, I got hit by an e-bike. And then they would whoever would mark it as an e-bike, and it would be, misleading. So
Okay.
I agree.
Now, what about times of day? Because, we find too that certain intersections look differently, daylight versus evening. Is the goal to have, the surveyors go out on different parts of the day or hour?
Yeah. Actually, part of the volunteer form is when would you like to do the survey?
Okay.
And so we now have a nice list of all of our volunteers, but also what times they're willing to go out. And we could actually assign someone, 2 different people, the same intersection if we wanted to capture it at different times of day. So especially for like places we find to be very problematic, we can assign multiple people who have different time frames. Like some people want to do weekend, some people want to do weekday. I think we can capture some really specific data for very certain intersections, but it will use eat our volunteer time up, but we could do that. Constantine, to your thing, I agree that maybe we could just say like pedaled or non-pedaled. Like I'm trying to think of like the thing that a person can see or like at least grasp very quickly as like what's the distinguishing mark.
I mean, motorized and non-motorized is a good distinguishing thing. But again, like you can't always tell if it's something just
Yeah.
pedal assist or and I don't even know if the distinction is really that, I think distinguishing between like a moped or a motorcycle and a bicycle is probably like the only distinction we should be making.
I think that that's the easiest one to make. I think most people could distinguish between a motorcycle or Vespa versus bike, right?
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's all we need, because that's also the weight classes, right? Like,
Okay.
yeah, a cyclist can go fast, but also it's a light object overall, and probably the impact and like the results from a collision are very different between those two classes. And it's the addition of a lithium-ion battery on one, I don't think adds too much weight to like the collision factor in terms of risk to a pedestrian. So we could mark off with a circle if they're on a sidewalk or not, because we're also marking off whether pedestrians are going into a crosswalk against a light, theoretically. That was part of the original tally sheet. We would mark out, adult in crosswalk, but if they were like going against the light, we would circle them. So we knew that we're doing something that was dangerous, not to judge it. Like, it's good to know though, that if people are constantly going against the light, there might need to be some kind of an intervention there. Oh yeah, Constantine, please. If you're,
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to add, people use bike lanes for all sorts of things. They use them for exercise, like jogging. They use it to haul their groceries or their laundry. I see a lot of people using bike lanes going the wrong direction, which is an indicator that they feel unsafe on that street. It's usually unprotected bike lanes where they do that. So that might make a case for cyclist safety in general and the lack of protected space, from motorists, for all sorts of activities, not just cycling.
yeah. I mean, one thing that I noticed in the data was that specifically the 6th Avenue protected lane, and Josephine, you know this, like we have a lot of pedestrians in that protected lane, which is really just for cyclists, but maybe if we do end up doing any of those intersections, which we very well might, maybe we can add something in the training for like, hey, is pedestrian in the protected bike only lane? That might be good to capture.
Or even the unprotected lanes. I mean, people jog in them all the time because it's kind of like an extra space,
Yeah. And that would be an interesting point of just like, hey, maybe that's an indicator that the sidewalks aren't good. If a jogger is in the like non-separated bike lane, maybe there's something really wrong with that sidewalk route that we can ask the DOT to look at, where it's like maybe there's really bad cracking. That could be an interesting indicator. Or it's just snowy and it's the only thing that's plowed, but anyone else have any like data points they'd be interested in analyzing, especially let's think forward to like the recommendations we're going to be making in a few months, like any data points that you would want to use to like make arguments, especially to the DOT.
We have to see the data before we make a decision on that.
Yeah, but what kind of data points would we, like, if we don't like say to look for something, we won't have that data to make our decisions and make arguments later. So I think we did have already covered a lot, especially from the last meeting, but we could, if no one has any, oh, yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth. Oh, you're reading.
Me? Okay, I thought
There you
let's
go,
call on
you're
Ruth
good.
first.
Who do you want first?
Go ahead, Ruth.
Oh, Elizabeth.
Oh, okay. So I wanted to say that one of the things that concerns me is the turns.
Yes.
The turns that people make. Sometimes they're like just right turns, particularly because you
Yeah.
don't always, it's harder to see them coming. They have less distance to cover. And sometimes they do it pretty fast.
Yeah.
And I think that has been in the past a cause of a lot of accidents and fatalities.
No, yeah, the data shows that those turns are much more likely to result in injury and death. Maybe when we do our training I agree, we should mark those. If we're going to be telling people to note like possible collisions, even if they're avoided, we should note if someone is making a crossing a car is coming straight through an intersection and then kind of braking to avoid a pedestrian, or if they're doing a turn and then braking to avoid a pedestrian, or the pedestrian is jumping back to get out of the way. It shouldn't just be if the car is making a maneuver. If you see a pedestrian avoid the car, that should be noted. So right now we're seeing, just to recap, we'll have a tally sheet. You're counting the number of people maybe in an intersection or not. If we could separate out the pedestrian count versus the conflict count. Maybe they can be two different 15-minute like segments, so you're not trying to like look at the whole intersection all the time and absorb everything. But one will be, the type of people, older adult, child, what are they doing, people with pets, and then a conflict map, a conflict tally, the times that a car is making a turn and stops, the time the person has to jump out of the way, and we'll have maybe different types of, a couple of categories of those, very simple, no more than maybe 3. And then you note down how many of those occur while you're watching. And then Elizabeth, please.
Thanks, Dan. What I don't think that this may not be able to be done. Can you guys hear me?
There's a little bit of an echo.
It's a little bit of an echo. but we can hear you.
It's an echo. Here, let me just, I'm sorry, I'll take it off the Bluetooth. I'm so sorry. Okay, 1 second. So it might be helpful to know is whether at some point, and whether maybe we just isolate certain intersections that might be useful to have this data on, ask people the question, would you let your 9-year-old cross the street here? And because in New York City, like 9-year-olds are supposed to be able to cross the street. And I feel like that should be the standard, right? 9-year-olds that's when you're supposed to have sufficient vision and risk perception that you are able to cross a city street in theory. But most parents will say no to most intersections. So I wonder if there are certain intersections that we can particularly flag if they seem more dangerous or near school, whatever, but if that might be a data point since you asked the question. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting data point. And that might be I don't think we have that on Jack's like survey of like feeling about the intersections. Those are things that we're going to put out to the public. My goal is like when people are out at the intersection with their little report, I want to have like a QR code in the top that if someone walks up and goes, "What are you doing? Are you with the city? What is this? Why are you looking at this?" The person can go, "Oh, I'm doing, a safety survey, but if you want to fill out your own survey about how you feel about this intersection here." And there's a QR code, and then they can fill it out and send it in, but that'll be like more of a feeling survey, and that'll be what Jack originally wanted. People could also print out physical ones, but the person would then have to hand them back to the person. And I like it when, the person isn't bothered at all. They just got how to show the QR back to studying the intersection. That's a great question to add to that. And Staley.
So a couple of items. So first of all, I second completely what Elizabeth is saying. And I think this is a strong argument for having people out there in the field in person doing this rather than just submitting videos, is that you can talk to the public. I mean, I don't even think they have to scan a QR code, to be honest. You could just ask them these questions and document their responses. I think there's also that also is an argument for if we're able to schedule volunteers as partners, if possible, right? So one person can kind of do the counting and one person can kind of interact with other people, which would be nice.
Especially at busy intersections.
Sure. Yeah. It's also just helpful to have two people, looking at things. And then the other thing is just to address what Dan was saying about separating out the counts from the collisions and so forth. That's actually exactly what I had in mind. So there is, from what I read, from my understanding of it, is there's kind of limited utility to doing counts of particular crosswalks and things like that, or someone's going from north to south or west to east on an intersection. That's not that useful unless you're getting down into the nitty gritty of actually trying to retime the signals, things like that, right? Like that's like the level of the DOT redesigning the intersection, I think, beyond what we need to do.
Yeah.
What we can do, I think, is split it out to where the screen line mid-block surveys, right? That's where we get an idea of the population of people, the volume of people in a given area approaching an intersection, right? And then that wide view of the intersection is the second survey we do, where we're looking for just behaviors, right? Conflict avoidance, illegal turns, all that kind of stuff, right? Stuff that is abnormal that we can count in the intersection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think splitting that out, it'll be like, 15
I think it'll be
minutes.
way easier to do it that way.
Yeah. 15 minutes at a nearby mid-block that we'll assign you to, and then 15 minutes at an intersection, count the possible conflicts.
Correct.
And then we have video training for it. Yeah. Go ahead, Barbara.
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering if, since we have children in schools doing civics for all, and we are asking for parental feedback about, intersections and crossing streets, if there was some way of getting kids involved in taking these surveys home.
Yeah.
And having their parents fill them out so that the kids are kind of working in partnership with us too.
I think that there could be, and this is just my thought, and I think that we all need to kind of have a chime in on this, which is, I don't want to have a child alone out there, right? But
I'm not saying to.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just saying to give them surveys to take home and distribute to aunts, uncles, cousins,
got it.
themselves, so that we get more direct feedback from the school community.
Yeah. I'm going to rope that into the idea of how useful it is to have a partner on these, right? Because Staley just mentioned having people partner up really can, someone can do one 15-minute segment and another 15 segment at the same time. One person has the time to, engage with the public. It might be hard for us based on the volunteer count to basically we'd be playing matchmaker for people. And with a lot of people, it might be hard to get two strangers to be going out to the same intersection at the same time. But maybe one thing we can do when we push this out on social media is emphasize that you can do this with a partner, with a kid, with your own kid. You can do this as a social activity with a friend. And you just only one person has to sign up, but let us know, you can bring a buddy. It'll make it go faster. You can do more. And we don't need to track that, as if you have a buddy, bring them, and we can make that part of the training. And that would really help with the idea of having like adult and a kid. Or we had a request from a Cub Scout group
yeah.
today that wanted to help. Like, if we maybe make this about like, you know, a family activity almost and think about it like that, we might get a lot more responses. Chris, go ahead.
Again, you know, like what I was gonna say is when you do a survey like this, well, I mean, is your goal to get as many reactions about a particular location like 86th Street and 7th Avenue? Then what you want to do is you want to have the kind of instrument where it takes less than a minute or so to ask someone those questions so you can get that data.
Yeah.
Years ago, I did a survey at the family court, and we wanted to find out what the numbers of users, you know, the types of users that were coming into the court. And you don't want to delay someone in family court getting to where they have to go. So you have to be very quick. Similarly, you're going to have people commuting. Maybe they're going to work in the morning. Maybe it's the lull in the afternoon. Maybe they're returning from work in the evening. You want to just be right there because the more people you interview, the better your results are. So the better informed your results are. So it's really great to get larger narrative information that maybe someone takes the time to fill out later, but it all depends on what you really want. You know, like if you're taking an inventory of all the pieces in a particular area that make things safe, provide space for different uses, so on. That's an easier survey to do with volunteers than say getting reactions from people. You know, you want those reactions to be honest and easy to like check off quickly. You're not having someone fill anything out. You're checking those boxes for them. So right away, your one pager is going to be like, you know, do you find this intersection safe? You're a cyclist. Do you think cycling here is safe? Do you find your space overused? You know, you just want to boom, 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 go get to the next person. And then if you're only there for half an hour, you know, from 8 a.m. to or an hour from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. during rush hour, then you're done, and then that information center, then you move on to the next thing. But I just wanted to bring that up so that the focus stays in line because this is great. I mean, the ideas and everything that's coming out and all the things that we want to look at and how we should classify different things, that's really important. But again, do you want responses from people and you know, you want more responses than fewer responses. You want as many responses as possible.
Yeah, and we also don't want the person who's doing the intersection, if they don't have a buddy, to have to like monitor someone else's survey while they're trying to get other data, right? Jack isn't here, but I did want to read out. Jack had come up with, this is what he had, and we can build on this because we're going to need to define that quick public, I'm calling it like maybe the public or the passerby survey, in addition to the volunteers have their own thing to do, but then any interested, or if you have a lot of buddies, someone can be doing like the handout questionnaire bit, that can be bonus. But this is like the public survey, the passerby survey. And Jack had 6 items on his list. He said, what kind of trip are you on today? And it was just some check boxes of like grocery shopping errands, walking pet, commuting, visiting nearby friends, visiting park, exercise, and other. And you could like write it down if you really wanted to do something with other. Number 2 is how safe do you feel at this intersection? And it's just 5 boxes from very unsafe to very safe. 3, an open format question of what makes this intersection safe or unsafe. 4, how do you get around on a daily basis? Walking, subway, bike, bus, car, e-bike, e-scooter, ride share, wheelchair mobility device, other, just a checkbox. You can check as many as you want. How old are you? So it's just 5 boxes of like varying age ranges, like 3 to 12, 13 to 19, 20 to 24, 25 to 65, and 65 plus. Those are actually the official federal like pedestrian age ranges that they study. And then 6th question is, are you walking with children? Yes or no? Do you have kids with you? And those were the public questions. I don't know if we want to refine those, have things that we maybe feel are too bulky or open-ended or want to cut stuff, make it faster?
I think the last two questions at least will come from the screen line pedestrian count, so we don't need to ask people about that individually.
That's true. We're already having someone out there counting that. If they pass by in front of the surveyor, we'll know general age and if they have kids. So that brings it down to 4. What kind of trip you're on today? How safe do you feel? What makes it safe or unsafe? And how do you get around on a daily basis? Yeah, Constantine.
I think getting people's age is kind of important because that can kind of determine how you feel about a certain intersection. Like I might feel safe crossing 4th Avenue and 86th Street, and somebody who has mobility issues, who's older or whatever, right? They might not feel the same. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we should take age out necessarily.
That's a fair point, because if you take age out, you wouldn't be able to correlate when people submit the survey, you wouldn't be able to correlate the answers to the age. Because the age would be in a totally separate like data group, and you would be able to say like, oh, most people who are 65 plus say that this is unsafe because of a specific reason. We could do a little bit of data analytics if we had the age. Yeah, Elizabeth.
I was just gonna say, I feel like people might bristle a bit at that first question about what kind of trip they're on, like what, you know, what kind of business is it of yours? So maybe we ask that one last. I don't know if that might be
That is
something
a
to
very
warm them up a
smart
bit so they
thought.
don't feel like we're asking what they're doing.
Yeah, I think maybe start with how safe do you feel at this intersection and what makes it unsafe or unsafe, because those are like the big ones we want to get. And then everything else is kind of gravy.
You might.
Staley.
Oh, just to kind of build on what Constantine was saying, that's a really good point. I think maybe a better way to do that is to give people an opportunity to explain why they feel like they do, right? Like, so a lot of the questions on that survey are like yes, no, or multiple choice questions. I think we have to have an opportunity to let them follow up, because we can then use that in our report, right? Instead of just saying like, are you over 65? And then do you feel safe? And just having those individual answers. If somebody says they don't feel safe in this area, we ask them why. And they say, well, as an older person, I feel like, blah, 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 blah. That little bit of text is something that we can really use to flesh out our final report and to personalize it and add like, people's feelings into it, which kind of like humanizes everything and so forth. So,
I agree. Let's have that. What makes this intersection safe or unsafe? That's an open choice question. Type up as much as you want.
And how many pages will this report be? This survey be at this point?
The report itself is probably going to be massive, and I will.
No, not the report.
But
this survey sheet.
This sheet, the one that's for the passersby, right now all fits on a single page. Right now, killing the question that we just did, it probably gets to about a half page, and that is with about 35-point type. I have a little, if you go onto the Trello, I do have, it's called the Pedestrian Safety. Oh, it's under Create an Intersection Questionnaire. And you can see the draft version that I made with Jack, but it is very large font, and it only takes up one page. And then there's a digital version in case someone just wants to do it on their phone and walk away.
Yeah, maybe we could send that out. We'll send that
Yeah,
out.
we're gonna send that out to the rest of the team so you guys can throw emails back with any suggestions or updates. But Barbara, yeah, your hand up.
Yeah, I might have missed this, so if I did, I apologize. Is there any place where we're going to ask people how often they use the intersection, and and if their feelings about the intersection, if they're negative, how that does that keep them from going out? Does it keep them from getting their groceries? Does it, what are the functional repercussions of this intersection on their lives?
Yeah, I mean, the form is small, we probably aren't going to get like a paragraph response on the physical form, but the digital form, you can kind of write as much as you want. Right now the phrasing is what makes this intersection safe or unsafe? I tried to keep it short. Is there a way of phrasing that that kind of elicits more of a response, maybe, that speaks to Barbara's concern?
Well, maybe if you feel that this is an unsafe intersection, how does that impact your daily life?
Yeah, because we're asking about the design in that question. What makes this intersection safer and unsafe?
Right.
Maybe, how do we feel about adding a question of like, how does this intersection like impact your what? I'm trying to think of like how you would phrase this, but like
I
something like
said,
that.
well,
This
your daily
intersection-
life, your daily activities, your
Yeah.
activities of daily living, which is how they assess people for nursing home care and everything else.
Yeah.
So you could just your activities of daily living. But I mean, you might want to just have that sense of, because I think the purpose of the survey is also to support that the community is struggling and that our quality of life is impaired because of these intersections
Yeah.
and how they work or don't work.
We front that the thing that we're now putting at the back of the survey, which is what kind of trip you're on today, right? That glances off of that issue a little bit. It captures a little bit of like how a person in their daily life is using this intersection, and we like broke it down to like easy check marks. Do we feel like giving people the opportunity to write more on that might be like how we loop that in? We give them the opportunity to do the check marks if they don't feel like writing or are confused by the question or don't have a answer.
Well,
But-
why is it important to us what kind of trip they're on?
That's more of like it's trip generation is the concept in the data, which is like understanding what kinds of pedestrians are at certain intersections. So like people at an intersection carrying groceries is kind of like a different reason for being there than like people walking pets or going on exercise. They like have different safety concerns sometimes.
Right. No, I get that, but I'm thinking, is there a way of getting all of that information from one statement?
Yeah, that's why I'm saying maybe we make this like more open-ended question, and we can gather it that way rather than having like.
I think you're going to get mixed results on this. Some people are not going to respond. I'm not going to give you any information.
Yeah.
I will
That's-
tell you, I recently filled out a survey about something and they asked me all those questions. Where did you come from? Where are you going? And I just said, fuck you, I don't care. And I stopped the survey.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like, and that's why we're putting that at the bottom of the list, right? Because we know it elicits that kind of response.
But
I
I'm
think-
wondering if you actually said, are you comfortable using this street? And if you're not, how does that affect you every day?
Yeah,
That's a different question.
yeah, I think that we drop the like what kind of trip, like again, I'm trying to think of what we would use that what kind of a trip you're on today, like groceries, walk, visiting, park. How are we actually going to use that data? I'm not sure. Like, how will that be in what will that be in the report? I don't know.
That is a very common piece of data to collect, though, at least in this type of survey, because it gives you an idea of like pedestrian flow, where are people going? What are some other sites you might want to survey, right? If everybody's going to one spot, maybe you want to go take a look at that spot. So
yeah, like the example I have that I keep coming back to is if someone says visiting park and they're in like the middle of Bay Ridge where there are no parks, it gives me an idea of like how far people are willing to go to walk to a park, which is actually good information for like estimating pedestrian flow. But But maybe to Barbara's point, we just include an open segment, just an open, like, write down, like, we have it's an open question already of what makes this intersection safe or unsafe. Maybe we just have an extra section for just like, what do you want to communicate to us? What do you want to say either to this committee, or maybe like, what would you like to say to the DOT? Or what do you want to, maybe not that, that'll get a lot of F-bombs, but like maybe a more open-ended question. And I don't know how we phrase that. So I saw Chris and then Constantine.
I was just gonna say, are there any example surveys that you've looked at from, I'm just curious, pedestrian survey samples that you've looked at all?
Yeah, we've had quite a few like examples, but none of them had a really like a specific thing that's for this that goes to what Barbara is getting at. Like
Okay.
they were like the ARP walk sheet is just a lot of tick boxes. There is just a general notes and observation section, but that's for a surveyor. That's a good point. We should probably look at a lot more generalized public surveys and see what those phrasing was.
Okay, I'll see if I can find something, a couple
Yeah.
others. Yeah.
Constantine.
Are we kind of like assuming that people are on a trip in general? Like, because if I'm gonna go do the survey, I'm gonna go do the survey. That's the trip that I'm on. You know?
Yeah, no, this is for the passersby. This is for if someone like sees one of our surveyors and asks what they're up to,
Yeah.
we give them this and we say, hey, we're collecting data. That's like, you're the public, I'm the surveyor, you're the public. I'm busy doing my count, but here, have this extra thing now that you stopped and wondered what I was doing. Because I've given out like, I've been like, I'm a nerd. I sometimes just hang out and count cars. Don't judge me. But
Got it.
sometimes people are like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm doing this. And then they ask all kinds of questions and they want to know what I'm doing. But I wish sometimes I had like a piece of paper to just give them and be like, here, you can help me by doing this. And sometimes people will stay and do it. Most of the time people will pass you right by. But then we could use it in the training where if like, for the training for the survey, it could be like, hey, do you have your like, are you doing this with your kid? Your kid could be counting the people and you could stand there and hand out a survey or hand out a QR code to passersby and do like an actual like flyering if you wanted.
And then sorry, but
Yeah.
I just want to go back to Barbara's point. I like the idea of like how this intersection inhibits like your daily routine or whatever, or if it does at all. I feel like that's going to be reflected in the hard data that we collect, and maybe like keeping this as objective as possible, like keeping subjectivity out of it. I like the idea of having the general like notes if there's something that you want to add in like specific. But if we make it too subjective, like how reliable is this data going to be, you know?
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also, we can play
Agreed.
with required and not
Mhm.
required, right? At least on the digital form. Nothing is technically required on a paper form because they can just hand it back to you in any state. But for the digital, we can have it be, we can flag certain things as you have to put this down in order to submit it. And other things we can make entirely optional, and people will skip them if they don't feel like it. So maybe we can rank now, like, what do we really want out of like that public passerby survey? And what do we feel is like, if you don't have a thing to say, no worries.
Like maybe like what if we did like an additional, like have any additional comments and like in the subtext under in the field, we
Yeah.
have, and we could recommend questions so they could think about it. Like, has the intersection have any obstructions, sidewalk obstructions, anything like that?
Yeah, we
That they're
could.
thinking.
Yeah, we could just do like a non-required at the very bottom single line. If you click it, it opens up to write more digitally, but you can skip right over it. Your eye will gloss right over it if you don't feel like it. But if there's a strong, like some people, when they are handed the survey, might have a strong reaction because they're like, finally, someone's looking at this thing, and they might want to write a screed. And I think we should let them. I don't know, and there might be some gems in that we could again put into the survey, the actual report as like box text. I don't think that, and especially if we're eliminating the 6th question of, are you walking with your kids? Yes or no. If we kill that, then we still have a 6th question that we could ask and not really impact the sizing of this form. And it's just like, any additional comments?
Yeah.
And that could capture a lot of things that we aren't even thinking of. So a person's comment might be like, I was hit at this intersection.
Mhm.
Like, that would be great to know and have like actual like, you know, anecdotal evidence of how people are getting injured. But we aren't eliciting a specific response. We're just covering our bases, right? So maybe that's how we handle it. And then we make, I think the requirement one is, how safe do you feel at this intersection? Very unsafe, very safe. That's like the baseline, right? That we want everyone to do. And I think all the rest of it could be optional, honestly. Like, that means if someone really just was walking, it would take them 5 seconds to answer this. And then the rest of it is gravy. What do you guys think? Or do we want to require a little bit more?
I like how vague it is. And it, you know, how safe do you feel? You know, like it's not specific, like, oh, how safe do you feel if you're over, you know,
Yeah.
9 years old but under 19 or something, you know, like
Yeah.
and yeah, the geez, I just forgot. Well, yeah, the general notes, like you just said, is just, I think that's probably the best way to go.
And making it this vague, I think also lets us just send this out to the public, period, without being tied to a surveyor. If we allow someone to fill in what intersection they're referring to, after we do or while we're doing our volunteer stuff, we could just send out a general thing of like, hey, you didn't want to volunteer? That's fine. Do you just want to gripe about a specific intersection, you know? Here's the form. I mean, we'll get a lot more responses for that. It will probably be difficult to parse, but that still is, I think, something that is very low lift for us to do if we already have the form. Feel good about that? That
Yeah,
sounds like we
I
could
think
do
that's
that.
good. Yeah.
I think we almost covered everything.
Yeah.
I think the rest of it is design work and getting the training filmed and recorded. So we'll probably have another working group session, like digital only. That's just if you want to get involved in like making the training video. Do you want to be starring in it? Do you want to be filmed like pretending to be doing a survey? Or if you want to do any of like Illustrator, InDesign critique on the layout. And that will, I think, be, you know, end of the month. And this is the next thing that we maybe can briefly talk about before we stop for the day, which is handling the volunteers and like processing the data. If anyone wants to volunteer to like kind of help organize some of that data, maybe helped out doing more trainings. How do you guys feel about like handling that kind of stuff? I mean, I will happily do the lion's share of that, but if there's any thoughts about, you know, how to deal with it.
Let us give that some thought.
Sorry, what was that?
We give it some thought.
Oh, yeah.
I'm ready to give it some thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the way that it's coming in is going to be in Google Forms. So it's going to be going into a Google Sheet, all of our volunteers. I'm happy to assign locations and kind of like actually, that is something we all need to talk about. There is a list on the Trello of like the most important intersections that we have to cover.
Yes.
Maybe I can just read those out really quickly. If I can find them. And see if anything kind of really jumps out to anyone. So these are the top 10 intersections for the highest number of injuries per 1,000 residents. So this is like weighted by the overall density of the neighborhood around it by about a block and a half. So the number one was 8th Avenue and 63rd Street. So right near
Oh, by the subway.
yeah. 8th Avenue, yeah, and 63rd. So yeah, and right near that bridge, so that like bottleneck. 7th Avenue and 65th Street. Again, 65th is going to come up a lot on this, or just in general. 4th Avenue and 86th, which is just that's the subway stop. Fort Hamilton Parkway and 92nd Street, which I also understand that's a big bottleneck. 8th Avenue and 65th Street. 5th Avenue and 86th Street. Shore Road and 4th Avenue. 14th and 86th. So we do have some Diker that pop up in here, which is very important. Fort Hamilton Parkway and 86th Street. And 7th Avenue and 92nd Street. So those were the biggest ones for not having a lot of people nearby, but having a lot of injuries. And then there is just the total number of injuries. These are the ones that have the biggest number. I'm going to skip over the first 4 are already in that prior list, but the ones that weren't are 4th Avenue and Bay Ridge Avenue. Fort Hamilton Parkway and 65th, 4th Avenue and 68th, and 5th Avenue and Bay Ridge Avenue. So those are kind of like our big intersections and where we're going to probably be assigning volunteers first. But we're also going to be sending people out to, like we talked about in the previous working sessions, institutional locations too. So we're gonna also, once we hit those, basically, I think it's just, 14 intersections. Once we hit that, I think we start sending people out to schools, all of the intersections around specific schools and parks.
And Dan, I also have a couple of locations that I can share with you that we have recurring residents saying that, whether they've asked for a traffic light, doesn't meet the warrants. There's some deadheading intersections that people complain about. And I want to mention to you that 8th Avenue and 63rd Street, right now, there's a lot of construction going on there.
So it might not be,
yeah.
it might not be representative.
I was by there, I walked by a few days ago, and it's pretty, in the morning time during construction, it's very hectic with trucks and loading, and it's just a construction, very busy area at this
that makes
time.
We might need to send everyone out before we send volunteers to check intersections to make sure that they're representative.
Yeah, we could do that easily.
Yeah, Staley.
I was just gonna say, I think what you're talking about here is maybe the key thing to accomplish in our next working group meeting is I think we need to have like a hard list of where we're going, like what our master plan is, and make sure we're all in the same, make sure everyone's in agreement, make sure we're not missing anything. I think that should be a goal.
All right. So next working group.
I would recommend that we look at 86th and 5th.
86. Yeah,
That's
I
almost,
mean,
yeah.
Because if you're ever there, like late in the day when people are, the number of people changing from one bus line to the other is unbelievable.
Oh yeah. I think that is on the list, so that's going to have to be one of them. And it is, I think, the only intersection that the DOT actually flagged on their website. I think it's
86th and 5th.
86th and 5th is what they consider a priority intersection. It is very funny how they determine that. what they do is they just look at the total number of injuries and fatalities in the borough, and they try to find how many can I select, how many intersections in the borough can I select to get to 50% of that total. So they just go by biggest one and they keep adding intersections until they reach 50% of the total, and then they stop calling them priorities. So they just get the ones that contribute the most to a big number. Which again, I don't want to chase too hard, because raw number of injuries, we're chasing things that are already unsafe. I'd like to see things that maybe are not the most obviously unsafe. And I love the idea of layering in the places that residents have called the CB10 about.
Yeah.
Because those are the places that probably no one has on their radar except for the people who are in the know and live right there.
Okay, so
But we'll make that the next working group session.
we'll send out a meeting notice and.
Any last comments? New business, old business?
Okay. All right,
All right.
everyone.
Thank you guys for taking your time to do this. It is
Thank you.
very appreciated.